Greetings, yogis. This is your first lesson or your first unit in the lesson on the overview of the three core tenets of Kamili Yoga. This first unit is on the creation of Kamili Yoga, how spirit inspired a new system of Afrocentric wellness. Now, I will do my best not to beat a dead horse in terms of repeating the same information that's on the website in the origin part. This is more for me to just talk a little bit more freely about who I am and just give a little bit more life to how and why exactly Kamili Yoga came to be. So the overview for this unit is who I am and my background, what inspired Kamili Yoga, and what Kamili Yoga is and is not. This is something that I make sure I speak about repeatedly because I want people to understand truly what Kamili Yoga is and is not in terms or in comparison to other traditional or more traditional older systems of yoga. So who am I? Well, first off, I'm Eternity Philops. I am the founder of this system and the organizer of the Kamili Collective. About me personally, I call myself a conscious and free Black queer being. I am LGBTQIA identified. More specifically, I identify as a non-binary person. A non-binary person is somebody who does not necessarily identify with any kind of gender title. So man, woman, those are gender titles. I see myself as simply being me. I do identify as being a female-bodied person, so I do navigate women's spaces. I am read as a woman because when we in mainstream society we think woman, female, they go together. So that doesn't necessarily it's not a big thing to me at this point in my life when people call me a woman. I'm like, yeah, it's fine. I grew up as a woman. My non-binary identity is a more recent development and something that I found is very comfortable for myself. So conscious and free. Conscious because as time has gone on, I've become more aware of not just who I am, but how society works, how oppression works, how privilege works. Really understanding and deconstructing the things that I grew up with, the things that I was taught and told, and realizing what has foundation in a sort of truth and what is something that is simply a social construct. And I consider myself free because I now have the freedom to release those social constructs and not feel as though that I have to adhere to them. In terms of being educated, that is both academically and also tied to the conscious and free part. I am academically educated. I have a bachelor's degree in psychology, double major of psychology and sociology. I went to UNC Greensboro in North Carolina. And then I also have a graduate certificate in women and gender studies that I received from UNC Charlotte. So these things have definitely informed my path. I do believe that you don't have to have gone to school and gotten a degree in order to be educated. That is something that is that can be done in a myriad of ways. And part of my freedom is recognizing that the education system here in the West does not dictate what true education is. So I also have certifications in both Hatha Yoga and Kemetic Yoga. Hatha Yoga being the most common traditional Indian system that people learn and teach when they become yoga teachers in the West. And then Kemetic Yoga is a Afrocentric system based on the history, the mythology, and hieroglyphics of ancient Kemet, now called Egypt. This system, as we practice it today, came about in the 1970s by Yasir Hotep. He and his teacher did research in Kemet, studying, again, the history, the hieroglyphics, and what they gleaned from that is what they used to create, I suppose we can call this modern version of Kemetic Yoga, because the term yoga did not exist back in these times in that civilization. So Kemetic yoga as we practice it would not have been called what it was then, and probably wasn't practiced in the same way that we practice it now, because thousands of years later there are all kinds of other influences. But like I said, it is still an Afrocentric system, and it still very much centers African identity, although in that case it centers primarily ancient Egyptian Kemetic identity, Kemetic culture. But I am certified in that. I love both systems. They've definitely been a part of my journey to get to this moment of creating Kamili Yoga, and I'll get into that. I am also a caretaker and a community builder. I am the oldest of 5 siblings, so I have grown up. I was an adult by the age of 9. I tell people like I don't have kids, but I've raised kids. Um, and that's definitely informed who I am as a person now. I believe I know how, and I enjoy taking care of people in a way that I've learned that doesn't violate my boundaries and my own needs, of course. But even more so than that, I am a community builder. I strive to be a community builder more specifically, and that is why the Community Collective exists. It is about more than just being able to teach this system, but also building connection and relationship, myself with students, and then students among each other. So that is a very key component in Kamili Yoga and the Kamili Collective that you are a part of. All right, so what inspired Kamili Yoga? Um, 3 main things here. First off is my own experience in my yoga journey, my yoga training. So like I said, I am certified in both Hatha yoga and Kemetic yoga. My Kemetic yoga was an immersion practice. I went for between 10 and 14 days to Jamaica, did the immersion with the cohort at that time, had an amazing time. It was wonderful. Came back home, and at that, about a few weeks later, I finished my Hatha yoga certification, which I had been in for about 6 or 7. Actually, at that point, I think it was about 8 months. Both of these I attained in 2017. And so receive my certifications. And of course, even once you're certified, hopefully you still continue to study and to learn more. And for myself, I always want to go deeper with something. Excuse me. I always want to like just know more about the paths of whatever I have learned about. So learned about Hatha yoga, and of course in your certification, hopefully if you were a certified yoga teacher, they also taught you about other systems of yoga: Jnana yoga, Karma yoga, Raja yoga. Raja yoga, the 8 limb path, is my absolute favorite Indian system. It really goes Raja yoga for me, then Jnana yoga, which is union through knowledge, self-study. Those are my top 2 favorites, and those are the 2 that helped inspire Kamili. But as I was learning more about, ancient Indian traditions, ancient Indian heritages, the spiritual system, the different Hindu gods and whatnot, I realized I didn't necessarily want to learn more about Indian heritage. I wanted to learn about African heritage because I am of African descent. And not to say there's anything wrong with learning more about Indian culture, but it's not my culture by any means. Like I don't have any Indian ancestors as far as I know in my family, but I do know I have African. Now, of course, being the descendant of an enslaved African, I don't know anymore what were my people in Africa. We talk about, oh yeah, we're of Africa, but Africa is not a monolith. There are many what are now countries, but many tribes, villages, past kingdoms and civilizations, communities, so many with different ways of being and ways of living, their own rituals, their own belief systems. And at this point in history and technology, we can't find exactly where we're from. We can do ancestry.com and kind of get a feel of what area of the continent we may have been from, but that's not the same as knowing truly who your people were of Africa. And that's something a lot of us have made peace with, but that doesn't mean that we can't still do research just into African heritage in general and kind of discover for ourselves through inner spiritual work where we might find that bond, that connection. And that's what I want to do. But I specifically want to do it through a yogic lens because yoga was or is a significant part of my development journey. What truly brought me to yoga in the first place, when I thought it was just some exercise for white people, was that once I learned what yoga was, a philosophy of self development, it was so perfectly in line with my spiritual journey at that moment. It wasn't that I discovered yoga, it was more so I discovered that what I was already doing was called yoga. And I didn't want to release that. Like, I didn't see any need for those two things to be separate, my yoga journey and my journey to learn more about my African heritage. I'm like, I want these things to be together. They should be together. There's no reason they should not be together. And so that is my personal inspiration into what led me down the creation of Kamili Yoga. So I decided that's what I wanted. And of course, I already have my Kemetic Yoga certification. But the limitation for me there was the focus again on ancient Kemet. And ancient Kemet is not the whole of African history. There's so much more, and I wanted to learn more. And so I started to look to see if there were any other Afrocentric yoga systems. The only other one I really found that stood out was Afro Flow Yoga, which is a system or style or brand of yoga. I'll call it a brand or style more so than a system because I don't know that the creator thinks of it as a system. But it is a brand of yoga that incorporates West African drumming and dance and with the yoga practice. And that was wonderful, but it still wasn't quite what I was looking for. So I did what research I could into trying to see if there's anything else out there that was really um, going to address what I wanted. And I could not find it. And so once I couldn't find it, I said, okay, I will make it, partially because that's just the personality I have. When I want something and I can't find what I'm looking for, I'm like, okay, well, I'll do it myself. That could be the elder syndrome because we always have to do stuff. We always have to do it. So that's what I just, all right, okay, that this is what I'll do. um, and it's like, okay, so this is what I want to do, and I feel a press forward. That's the other thing. So it wasn't just like, oh man, we should really have some more, Black yoga systems do going on about my life. There really was a push to do this because whenever I kind of veered off course and would just, do other things, I'm like, yeah, that's a good idea. I'm not really going to do that. Something, and I call this spirit, would always kind of pull me back. And it wasn't a hard pull. It was just a very gentle, I was kind of on the path and I would, take a little side trip somewhere. And then that side trip would always bring me back to creating this system. And the system wasn't even called Kamili Yoga in the beginning. I was still trying to figure out what name. I actually was going to go with Uhuru Yoga. Uhuru is freedom in Swahili, but it was already taken. So I was like, okay, all right, I'll figure out something else. So while I'm still just trying to name it, I'm thinking, what exactly does this need to be? So that's when I went back into what my desire was, the search for my African heritage, and not necessarily, again, not like the specific knowing the people from whom I descend, but just wanting to know more than what I've been taught as a Black American in this country. And so as I'm kind of developing that, I realized that we really do need more stuff that promotes Black knowledge and empowers Black wellness. Because when we see yoga, we see white people. You don't even see Indian people that much, and those are the systems that we're learning about. All, the majority of yoga teacher trainings are led by white people, typically white women, but actually I'll take that back. There's a lot of white men that will lead trainings, but you see a lot of white women that lead classes. So that's a whole different conversation there. So between knowing about Kemetic yoga, Afroflow yoga, and then any smaller systems that I would find were still Egyptian focused, they all still focus on ancient Egypt. That we just needed more. So the other part of putting together the system, which is, like I said, is led by spirit, is specifically decentering whiteness and subverting westernized, colonized approaches to yoga. Because, like I just said, the majority of what you see in yoga practice and in just yoga demonstration, just the yoga representation is white people. Um, you don't often see Black folks in yoga unless you are specifically looking for Black folks in yoga. And that's the thing. If you look for Black people in yoga, you'll find them. But the sad thing is that you have to look to start with. Nobody ever looks for white people in yoga. They're the default. So the system as it was being created was definitely about decentering whiteness in terms of representation, in terms of celebration, in terms of association. It's like there's no reason that there should be any whiteness in this system. There really shouldn't be any whiteness in any yoga systems because they're not from white cultures. Um, so, but the other thing when I say subverting westernized, colonized approaches, so there are hundreds upon hundreds of brands of yoga. And I separate a brand from a system because a brand is something that represents your business, your company. I have a brand, Soul Liberation Wellness. So Liberation Wellness it began as Soul Liberation Yoga. So that was my brand of yoga. That was my business. We see all kinds of other brands that are more well known. So Baptiste Yoga, I would call, well, no, Baptiste is its own system. I'll get back to that one. Let me stop myself here. Let me correct myself. We do see different brands. What I'm trying to say is when we see newer systems, we still see them centered in whiteness. So that's where I'm going with, say, Baptiste. Baptiste yoga is a system of yoga because they have their own tenets and how you go about doing things. A modern system centered around whiteness. And when I say centered around whiteness, I don't mean that they like glorify whiteness or anything like that. It's just that's who you see. That's who you see. There's Jiva Mukti Yoga, created by a white couple. That is also a system of yoga, a modern system that they have their own specific tenets. I think like part of their tenets is environmentalism and perhaps like veganism or vegetarianism. They have their own their specific focus that builds up or is the structure for their system. So we have modern systems of yoga that are very much accepted among the mainstream. What we don't have is a wide selection of Black centered or Black celebrating Afrocentric systems of yoga. And again, I say system, not brand, because a brand is anybody who makes up a business that, and if that business is yoga centered, then great, you have a yoga brand. That's all well and good. But a brand doesn't necessarily have tenets. A brand doesn't necessarily have structure. A brand usually just puts out whatever is already existing. So a lot of Black yoga teachers who say teach vinyasa yoga, they don't have their own systems. They have their own brands. And I'm not knocking this. I just want to be very clear about the difference. That's why we need more systems because systems have tenets, they have structure, they have components, they have specific ways in which you practice. And that's what Kamili Yoga is. It is a system that has structure. It is a system that is specifically created to celebrate and honor Black identity and Black cultures. Okay, it is more than just a brand. It's not just oh, that sounds really nice and really African. So I'm going to call something Kamili Yoga, and then we're still just going to Vinyasa and Yin movement, and we don't have anything that's really specific, that really separates itself from any other yoga system that's out there or yoga practice that's out there. A system has to be different in its own way somehow that you can tell the difference. Like, for example, you know the difference between Raja Yoga and Bhakti Yoga. Bhakti Yoga is union through devotion to God. That system of yoga is entirely different from Raja because it has its own tenets, it has its own structure. For example, asana, the physical movement of yoga poses, is in only two of many Indian yoga systems. Asana is a part of Hatha yoga, and it's a part of Raja yoga. It is what the third limb. And even with asana being a part of both of those systems, Hatha yoga is meant to be to the glorification of Raja yoga. So those two systems are still connected. So that's just an example again of how systems will have their own reason for being that isn't meant to just copy or be identical to something else. All right. So hopefully that makes sense. Trying to go forward here. There we go. All right. So something I also didn't talk about was the name Kamili Yoga. So I just wanted to share that is because naming something is very significant. You can't just pop a term on something new and be like, oh yeah, that sounds nice. Kamili Yoga was very intentional. Kamili means complete in Swahili. And so, like I said before, I originally wanted to call the system Uhuru Yoga. Uhuru means freedom. And soul liberation wellness, liberation, that's the English word for, a synonym for freedom. So I was kind of staying in that kind of theme. But when Uhuru Yoga was not available to me, it made me really sit down and think, okay, I was like, okay, what is this system? What is it about? And so as I was searching, just like, honestly, just looking up terms like, let me look up what this means. No, that doesn't quite sound right. No, this, no, that's not. And then I can't even tell you how I came across the term Kamili. I don't remember, but I was looking it up. And it means Kamili means complete. I'm like, hmm, that sounds right because Kamili is a nice word that comes off the tongue, but it also felt right. Because what is completeness? Well, that is what we're seeking when we practice yoga to start with. We're seeking union with ourselves and our higher power, and we're seeking completeness through that union. Also, the fact that yoga is meant to be a holistic practice, holistic meaning addressing all of the parts of the whole, which also means complete. So that is how Kamili Yoga came to be because it was just it snapped right into place and it was perfect. And to be clear, if you were to say it in the true sense of Swahili language, it should actually be Yoga Kamili because the yoga term would come first, and there's not a Swahili interpretation for yoga. It's just yoga. So it would be what is it? Subject, adjective. Don't quote me on the language parts. So instead of Kamili Yoga in speaking in Swahili, it would be Yoga Kamili. But being Western, if I call the system Yoga Kamili, that doesn't translate well to the typical mind. It's like Yoga Kamili. But if you have Kamili Yoga, people understand that because of just the forms that yoga systems and yoga brands take. So, Bikram Yoga, Kemetic Yoga, Vinyasa Yoga, all of something yoga. That makes sense in the Western translation. So, moving on, what Kamili Yoga is and is not. So, Kamili Yoga is a modern system. I make this very clear because I don't want people to think that Kamili Yoga, like Kemetic Yoga, is based on research and actual um, traditions, actual practices that did exist in some form or fashion in an African civilization. Kamili Yoga is modern. It launched in 2020 and it's created by a Black American, myself. I, again, am of African descent, but I am not an African. I did not culturally grow up African. So I cannot say that this is an African system. That's why I call it a Pan African system because Pan African includes both continental Africa as well as the African diaspora. So we are all by descent, descent. We are all by descendants part of the African diaspora. And so Kamili Yoga is a pan-African system and is an Afrocentric system, but it is not itself an African system. All right. It is Afrocentric and it serves Black and African people specifically. This is who is centered in Kamili Yoga. A lot of things that I learned from my Indian yoga training, I am looking to find an African parallel. And it's not to say I'm trying to appropriate Indian yoga or Indian culture, but a lot of things that exist in yoga exist universally in cultures around the world in some form or fashion. And so typically you will find um, something that exists as this word here exists as another word in another culture there. So that's what is that's what allows me to make it Black centered without appropriating things from Indian culture. That's how I feel a lot of the modern white systems exist. They take from Indian culture and then they make their own thing from it. So like Jiva Mukti yoga, I've never practiced it. I don't know these people. I'm not trying to talk smack about folks. I don't know. I'm not trying to even say anything is wrong with their system. It's not a judgment about Jiva Mukti itself. However, Jiva Mukti is founded by a white couple, and they use Indian heritage terms and concepts. In general, there's really nothing wrong with that, but we live in a world of constant white appropriation. And so I don't want to be a part of that, even as a Black person, because Black people can appropriate too. We don't often like to think that we can because we're so often the victims of appropriation, but we can appropriate too. And myself as a Black American, I can appropriate African culture if I am not conscious about it. So Kamili Yoga isn't meant to be an appropriation of African culture. It is a celebration of African culture. And like I said, it serves Black and African people. That doesn't mean that it excludes non-Black and non-African people. Technically, white folks could join the collective if they want to, but I make it very clear this space serves and centers Black folks. This system serves and centers Black folks. If you are non-Black, but you understand that, you respect that, and you want to learn more about that in the same way that we do, but perhaps you just don't have the same connection, like it in the same way that many of us who are yoga teacher certified, like many of us, we enjoy the systems that we learn. They're beautiful systems, and I have a very high respect and honor and love for what I've learned through learning about these traditional Indian systems. And I have a connection to that. My connection to Kamili Yoga is deeper because that represents me. But that doesn't mean I can't still be a part of these other systems. The same thing with Kamili Yoga. Somebody who is non-Black can come in here and celebrate with us and be a part of this and recognizing that, yes, we need more Black-centered spaces. I want to learn more about Black history that I don't know, Pan-African history that I haven't been taught. And that's all well and good. Where the problem would come is, you trying to come in and trying to, appropriate or say this is racist, and because, they felt like to do that. But it's not racist to celebrate your culture. Um, and that's just want to be clear for the Black folks who do practice this. This is not about, yay Blacks, no whites, that kind of thing. Now we are anti-white supremacy, like we are anti-white privilege, we are anti-oppression, but we are not fully anti-white people. We all got some good white friends. Well, some of us might. All right. Lastly, this is LGBTQ LGBTQIA plus, founded and affirming. As I spoke, I'm a queer person myself. I cannot have, I'm not going to create something that is anti-me. That just doesn't, no, we're not doing that. And I made that very clear because a lot of people in Black communities who are very supposedly pro-Black are still anti-queer, and for some reason don't make the connection that yes, Black people can be queer and queer people can be Black. There's always a separation, and that's because when that's not your lived experience, it's very hard for you to imagine that such a combination exists. And yeah, that we're not about that. This is not a space for anti-queer Black folks. Just like those two, the is and the is not, are basically the same statement, just written two different ways. And the people who are part of this collective are expected to be also queer affirming, not tolerant, but affirming. Tolerance is the lowest level of not even respect. So Tolerance is a term from the 90s. I feel like society in some form or fashion has evolved just a little bit beyond that. We need to get to a state of being queer affirming as a Black community because that is part of how we unify. Um, Nitpicking over somebody's sexuality or gender identity does nothing to strengthen us as a people. And what is most unfortunate is how so much anti-queerness exists on the African continent due to just colonization um, and just I'll just outright call it brainwashing, and that's global in terms of thinking that queer folks didn't exist in traditional African societies. Um, we did, and we do. All right. So, closing thoughts. So once again, I created Kamili Yoga, but only because Spirit created Kamili Yoga through me. I talk a lot about being not just the teacher of the system, but also a student. The system is still going through evolution. There will be some things that I teach in some of these early lessons that at some point might get updated and changed because Spirit has moved differently or some new information has come in. And that's great. That is well and good because this is an evolving system. Now, the main three tenets, which will be in the next units, will still be the same, but those tenets themselves might evolve and expand. But again, this is a spirit inspired system that is it's not a project of ego. It is very much something to serve my people, to serve my communities. In a time of global anti-Blackness, Kamili Yoga addresses the need for more Afrocentric systems that honor and celebrate Black identity and cultures. So Kamili Yoga is not about being in competition with the few systems that exist. It is meant to be an addition because we have room for more. And like I said, it is anti-Blackness. There, you cannot escape it. Even when you're in black communities and black societies, colorism exists, sexism exists, misogyny. So there are still forms of anti-blackness that exist even among black people. And so we need more ways to address that and try to heal that from the effects of slavery and colonization. And then lastly, being a modern system does not make Kamili Yoga any less of a powerful system. No matter how old a system is, whether it's like centuries or thousands of years old, it still had to start with a day one. So Kamili Yoga is in its infancy, but we all know the babies are powerful. So these are the closing thoughts on this lesson. Um, as always with these lessons, self-guided, you're welcome to watch and rewatch as is necessary, taking notes. But thank you very much for being a part of the collective and stay with me as we both continue our learning together. Asante, Ashe.